All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back here on this stage to convene us again after a long day of practical, thoughtful, reflective, and all pun intended, generative conversations about generative AI. I now have the pleasure of moderating a discussion on next steps with these three key thought leaders at the intersection of AI and education. We're going to address all of these big questions and bring them all together in 30 minutes or less and get you all to the train station or the airport or wherever you are going next. So you met them already this morning, but please join me in welcoming back Vistap Kabari from Complete College America, Stephanie Karana of the Axum Collaborative, and Jim Runcie of Partnership for Education Advancement. So because our time is short, we're going to do all lightning round all the time. We're going to kind of keep all this going. What I thought we would do to kick off is to do something this afternoon at 4 o'clock that we couldn't have done this morning at 9 a.m. So I want to ask each of the panelists to talk very briefly about a key theme or a key word that emerged for you over the course of yesterday and today that wasn't in the title of of the session itself. That spoke to you, that emerged through the conversations, and that was worth coming here, showing up for, and hearing. So I'm going to pass this down, and we'll go from there.
So I have a short memory, so I'll stay with the last session, which is basically human-machine interaction and machine-to-machine and human-to-human interaction. And I think it's an important topic purely because when we start looking at Gen AI, and we look at it in terms of how we're going to impact thousands and millions of people, we have to start thinking not so much in terms of that interaction, but how our interactions between each other are so very different. We have societal norms, we have cultures that are different, and we tend to behave very differently depending on where we are. And so what I took back from that was not just the human to machine, but do we even understand how we interact with each other when we come from different cultures, different countries, and if we're in a different location, and how is that going to impact the way that we look at the use of AI in terms of equity in higher education and learning possibilities?
Thank you. I sort of look back to the conversation with President Abdullah, and I think about the conversation about how fast do you move, right? And when you think about under-resourced institutions and institutions that don't have the level of staffing or technology, for them to move quickly and not have it right creates a significant risk for those organizations. So how do you balance the need for those organizations to move quickly so that there isn't, further, gaps that are being amplified, but not be in a situation where they've made investments or decisions or policies that create harm or actually use up resources that they might need to move forward? I don't know the answer to that question, but that's something that kind of jumped out to me, like, so how do we deal with that? Because if they move slowly, they're going to be behind. They're going to have to play catch up, but they're going to have to take some risk if they want to move quickly. So that's something that just popped out today.
Thanks, Jim. I guess I'm thinking back to places where we started when we said we're in this moment, and we all commented on that, and it's we're kind of at a time where things are unfrozen. And then thinking about David's point about the change is accelerating even faster for generative AI compared to computers and others, and how do we think about a moment where we're unfrozen yet it's moving very fast? And so I think about this idea as I listen to the sessions and all of you and how we're here, all of you very open-minded about how to connect with each other. I think it's really about thinking outside the building. We think outside the box, but we really need to think outside the building, and that means really opening our minds to how do we shape, reshape, reconnect, and combine in new ways, and being bold about that, but at the same time being practical. And I think change often happens fast when you can have some short-term milestones, but then some bigger-term aspirations. I'm thinking about Patrick, who said, are we thinking big enough of how we're redesigning, or President Abdullah? And I think we have to be thinking about that, but how do we have those near-term things that connect to the longer-term ones as we go through this rapid cycle of change and bring more people along? So I think that's one key piece of it. And then connected to that is who's driving the bus. And I think we are not doing enough for the students to be leading. I think that the great ideas, they're not already in a box. they haven't experienced the boxes that we're all in that are keeping us from thinking outside the building. And so how can we put the students not just in the center, but out front? And how can we think about innovation in that type of model?
All right. So those are some great keywords and themes that we heard around speed and the challenges of that, around being human and bringing humans together and into interaction with computers, and in fact, getting outside the building, getting outside the box, and putting. I was waiting for someone to say it, student voice at the center of the table. I think we all really heard that the next conference of this should be about 90% students and 10% administrators, and that rather than the other way around. So we'll definitely do that. Now, you all are practical people, implementation-oriented people. Some of you have also been here a year ago at a similar sort of gathering, right? And many of you here in the room, and many of you have been to other ones. So a year from now, right? What's one thing that you hope that a next step that colleges, universities, some of the different stakeholders here can take? Practical next step that people should aim for, a goal we can set as we leave the room today for something we can accomplish in the next year. And I'm going to start with Jim on this one.
Sure. So, I think there needs to be significant investment in the infrastructure to make AI happen at many of the schools that we work with. So to have the right data infrastructure, the right data governance, the processes, the people, the resources. We've worked, I think, in the last 2 years on about 400 projects at partner institutions. And some of the things that we took away from that were, some of the things were, the systems that they have in place are sub-optimized in the first place, right? They might not even have the latest system, but the systems that they have are sub-optimized. So systems optimization is really important. The need to integrate with systems, that's another thing. We had a robotics process automation project. And before we could actually get the bots to go from system to system to get the answers, the systems all had to kind of be, upgraded, and then integration had to happen. And in some cases, the solutions that the schools were looking for, they could actually do that within an existing system if they had it optimized, right? So, but that's going to require investment without any immediate upside, right? So do all that infrastructure stuff to get the resources, and that's before you start putting in, student-facing apps, sort of AI layer and all these different things. And so, that's going to be a resource challenge, I think, for some of these institutions, and we have to sort of think about that. But that's, I think, a required next step to really look at putting data, systems and structures and processes in place to take advantage of AI. So who gets the hot mic next?
So I'll go with the inspiration of the Socratic method over salad. If everybody remembers last night's dinner conversation, the art of asking a good question that actually prompts deeper thinking about something that really matters. When I think about how change happens and we think about things like the internet, the things that seem like they really mattered now were decided in its early days, maybe in the first 2 or 3 years. We just didn't know it because it didn't quite show up yet. But you look back and you're like, oh, what was that? And I think if we have the art of the good question, the deep question of what matters now and what do we need to do, I don't think we've come across that yet. And so if within the next 6 to 12 months, have we nailed down the questions that will matter in 2050? And have we set the right things in motion that will prevent and set the guardrails for what will make sure that AI, in fact, does have an equitable approach, it is inclusive, and we've got the right funding, the right mechanisms, the right access, and the right ways that we're thinking about how this can lift this next generation as opposed to divide it further. So asking good questions, and let's figure out what those are and make sure that we've nailed them down.
So 2 things, if I may. The first is that we can all confidently say that all our students and all our faculty and all our staff have used Gen AI. You'd be surprised at what the numbers really are. The second is following what Sis Stephanie said. Do we have the courage to ask the right questions as to what we could be doing given the power of Gen AI, rather than trying to fix the problems that we've just hidden from for years and years? Because all we're doing then is we're just mitigating and continuing a system that may not be needed.
Okay, so these are some good comments. They may not even add up, right? Right. And part of it is right. Can we fix these systems? Right. Jim's sort of asking, maybe the systems we have now are the ones we should fix, right? And that AI may not be the solution to it, right? We may need to fix the ones that we have, right? And an earlier conversation that I had suggested that maybe some of these problems that we have, student success, summer melt, transfer credit, et cetera, we're grasping at AI to solve things that maybe we should have solved already, right? And so it's a solution is only as good as the humans who implement it, right? And that brings me to some of the next thoughts that I'd love for you to hear from you about are some of the humans, right? The humans in the room that you met today, the humans that are not in the room that you wish were here, et cetera. And I want to talk a little bit about collaboration. And from each of you, what are some of the key collaborators and collaborations that can actually demonstrably, practically advance the use of AI for student success, right? And at the same time, what's a barrier, right? What's standing in the way of those collaborations getting off the ground tomorrow, right? So here I'll start with Fistas.
So I think the two, we've already heard from one, which is the student voice. We don't use that as much as we should, but we've talked about that, so I'm just going to take that for granted. The second is a true conversation between the developers, the implementers, the vendors, and the universities in trying to understand what is possible, but for us to also understand what do we really want? Because half the time when we go to them, we are halfway through an RFP before we realize, oh, what I really wanted was something else. I think that collaboration, that partnership, where it starts way back rather than after the fact, is going to be really important for us.
I'm going to go back to the student voice because, we heard from a few students, right? But at any institution, it's not monolithic, right? You've got a bunch of different personas and different use cases at these institutions, right? And so I think having the right student voices across, and in the conversation could potentially make a difference, right? And I don't know what that composition is, but, you talk to different students, you get different needs. There might be different, things that they might need for sufficiency. And so I think we just have to have a holistic, conversation with as many students and have a statistically significant number of students across a number of different institutions to make it work. But that's just one point.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Jim. So collaboration. So when I think about, first of all, we have to really define this problem well, which is how do we think about having more students succeed in the education that they need in order to lead fulfilling lives with social and economic mobility. I think that's what we're really trying to solve for as it comes to our education and reinvent what that looks like. Right now, there is actually a lot of money going to education. You look at the money that's coming at the federal level, that's in our institutions, that we have in our budgets. There's some philanthropic money that can be catalytic. There's time and talent in general ways. How do we actually think about our resources and redefining and repurposing them in new ways to actually create the system we want? And so, I think that we have to be thinking about that full picture for what is sustainable, and then how do we start building towards that? And that requires a lot of collaboration. So anybody who's willing to take you have to break down some barriers and redefine some things, but that's what type of collaboration means. It's like rolling up our sleeves to do it. And then thinking about what are the near-term things that show success to bring people along. And so I think that is the type of collaboration that's going to start breaking through barriers. And again, going back to the students, I've just supported so many student entrepreneurs. Even my kids, they are coming up with things they're coming up with questions I don't even think about. And so, and how do we harness that in more of a innovation incubation type of way, not putting them in the existing system, asking them how do they want to navigate the existing system, but just thinking about how do we innovate adjacent to the existing system, so we're bringing things along, but we have enough space to actually innovate in ways that change the system.
Now, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the corporate stakeholder, the workforce, right? And yeah, no, so I'm thinking, you know, they should probably be a part of the dialogue, maybe not lead the dialogue, but ultimately the success of many of these students will depend on what kind of skills and how workforce ready they are. So that may be another part of the collaboration process.
I have one more, sorry.
Sure.
And here's a plug for open resources. So I loved hearing about the OER. We have OpenEdX. I mean, there's a lot of all open source, I mean, this is all sharing. The more we share with each other, the further each dollar will go.
All right, so I think those are some great reflections on the importance of collaboration and everything from from working with students, with employers, to better procurement processes. Before this, one of the people advised me, don't talk about procurement in the last 10 minutes. We'll put everybody to sleep. And then Shimona started talking about procurement in the last session. All of your ears perked up because she actually had a solution for us, right? So maybe, right, there are reasons why that we are all here. All right, so one last thing for us to think about, which is a metric for success. Right? So you've talked about a next step, right? You've talked about the collaboration partners, right? And you're sort of thinking about where to go, in a year, in 5 years, in 20 years, when things are going to be beyond our imagination. So this is for each of you in turn, but whoever wants to take it first. What for you is the most meaningful metric of success in this area? Take it as you want.
So I'm going to put two forward. The first goes back to CCA. What is the perspective? What is the policy? And what is the practice? If we truly are able to get that across the board, even for small topics in terms of Gen AI, then we would have moved the needle significantly. If we can take best practices and make them available to just about everybody, if we can bring different perspectives to the table and use those to inform policy that can then be used to drive equity, I think that would be one metric. Now, this is a soft metric in the terms that there are no numbers, but we'll know when we've succeeded, because then we will have practices that are across the board. We will have policy that is informed, and we'll be bringing perspectives to the table rather than saying, oh my gosh, I forgot. The second is to truly make a difference, not an incremental one, but a transformational difference in student success, which means access and attainment. And let's not talk about attainment as being 2% a year or 5%. I don't know what the number is, but it's got to be a transformational number that says we've been able to shift that needle and it's led to socioeconomic mobility.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe time to gainful employment, right? If and again, it's from the lens of a first generation Pell eligible framework, right? Which is time to gainful employment. You know, this is an investment, right? It's something that you've got some hopes and dreams based on. You want to be someone, you want to be successful, high functioning adult. And when you think about the 52% number of people who graduate after 6 years and they're underemployed, I'm not so sure how I feel about that, right? So if it was 4 years and then it's gainful employment, I don't know what those metrics, we have to have figure out what the baseline is and figure out what the growth is, but that might be a way to capture at least one economic definition of student success, and so I'd throw that out.
No, I agree with all of that. We need to think about what are the student outcomes, how do we embed that in our systems and our technology so that we know along the way, and I think that's a given. So I agree with all that. I think I'm going to take the question in a different direction based on the last conversation of what does it mean to be human with AI, and what are we trying to optimize in terms of thinking about AI engagement. And I think in some ways I want to almost flip the question and say, in terms of what we measure for success, what are meaningful moments to us? And when you think about, if you think back, if just each of you do a thought experiment, if you think about somebody who, when you were back in your college days, your post-secondary days, who's somebody that mattered to you, that made a difference to you? Maybe it was academically, they directed you to a path of study or a course, or maybe they picked you up during a low moment and helped you through. I mean, just to think, who's the person who comes to mind? Just think about that. And then all of us are educators. Think about somebody who maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago, that came back to thank you because you believed in them, you saw something in them that they didn't see in themselves, and they became somebody who they didn't think they could be, but yet. So does people have somebody in mind there too? You can think of somebody? And then think of somebody who you went out of your way, you probably lost sleep over, you had an incredible amount of anxiety about, you didn't know how they were going to turn out, and they did okay, but they didn't actually know you helped them. And they never came back to thank you. They didn't know that you actually helped them, but they changed you. And I see Kim nodding. And I think, to me, when I think about those, I have people's names in all of those categories, so many of them. And those were all meaningful moments. And I think if we measure our success in meaningful moments over time of people who knew us, we knew them, and we made each other better humans, and together we had a better humanity. We could say at 2050, we have we have humanity that we didn't think we had before. I feel like that would be an important measure to look back on.
I'm not going to say anything after that, especially given the environment. Those words are wonderful.
Indeed. Those, Stephanie, thank you for those. That I couldn't ask for a really better way of kind of summing up what brought us all here into the room. So just really briefly, before we finish up, this just a couple of words of conclusion and thanks. Stephanie asked us to think outside the building, but let's think inside the building for 1 minute and give one round of thanks to the building staff, the catering staff who are represented by Unite Here, Local 25, and our AV team back in the back of the room. And thanks also to all of you for coming and joining the building, traveling a great deal, talking to each other, being present for the day. And with that, I'll give the last word, final word, recover what Jana said in the previous session. It's time, sometimes it's time for the humans to just get to work. So go, your class dismissed, time to get out and go to work. So.